Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at a couple of unique game controllers from 8Bitdo. These are their new Bluetooth Lite controllers, and as you can see here, they've got a ton of directional pads on them. They've got one here, here, and here, and these two directional pads actually replace the analog sticks that you would have on a traditional PC or Nintendo Switch gamepad. These will work with both the Switch and the PC, and I guess any device that supports X input. And we're going to be taking a closer look at these in just a second because they are quite unique. Now, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that these came in free of charge from 8Bitdo. However, all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nobody is paying for this review, nor is anyone reviewing or approving it before it gets uploaded. So let's get into it now and see what these controllers are all about. So let's take a closer look now at the hardware. These cost about 25 bucks. You've got the blue one here and the yellow one. These are designed to complement the colors of the new Nintendo Switch Lite, but of course they'll work with the older Switches too. And it will work in, again, Switch mode or X input mode. And unlike other 8Bitdo controllers that require a combination of buttons to switch modes, this one has a simple switch. So I just moved from S to X, which means it's now in X input mode. If I switch it back here, it's now back in Switch mode. This will connect over Bluetooth, but there's also a USB Type-C connector here at the top. This is how you charge the controller, but it also will allow you to plug it directly into your host device if you choose to go the wired route. And we'll explore some of the button latency that you might experience with this in both configurations in a minute. Now, the big feature here are the dual D-pads, and this is either going to work or not work depending on the game that you're playing. These are digital, which means that they are either on or off. There's no subtlety to this or any kind of fine movement you can make with this. It's either going to be all the way pushed down or not at all. So there will be games that will work just fine with this arrangement, but other games like 3D titles where you want to maybe walk slower with your character or pan the camera more slowly really won't work here because, again, this is either full blast or off. And we'll show you some of the things that work and don't work with it in a few minutes when we look at some gameplay in a little bit. These buttons here are the traditional D-pad. So these will act as the D-pad, and again, these will work as the analog sticks. Then you've got your selection of buttons here. Now, the buttons on these controllers remind me a lot of the buttons on the Switch Joy-Cons. They're very small. They don't have much travel to them. There's a bit of a click when you push them down, so you do get a good tactile feedback with them, but they're not going to be like the buttons we see on some of the other 8Bitdo controllers that mimic the older classics that have a lot more travel to them. So both the D-pads here have very minimal travel, the buttons have very minimal travel, but all of them have a very satisfying click to them. So if you like that feel of the Joy-Con, then this will be a nice alternative perhaps, and it will also work better in games like Link's Awakening, which require you to use the analog stick for movement, and some folks might want to use a D-pad for that. This will give you that experience, but it won't be for every game where you want a D-pad with more travel or something that can roll a little bit better. It's very precise, which isn't bad, but it's a different kind of feel, I think, than what some games might require. So it'll have to be up to you to decide which games will pair best with this. Because it is a compact controller, you don't have two layers to your shoulder and triggers here. So the L2 buttons are next to your left and right triggers here on the controller. And again, everything here is digital, so they're either on or off, and there's no pressure sensitivity with any of the stuff on here. So that is the overall controller layout. Let's boot up my PC first so you can see how all of these things map out, and then we'll take a look at a few Switch games. All right, so I have my controller now paired up with my PC, and if you keep an eye in this section here, you will see that crosshair move as I move the left D-pad. Again, this is getting mapped to the left analog stick on the direct or the X input configuration here. And you'll notice that there's no variation to the sensitivity. When I push it down, it is on. When I take my finger off, it is off. There is nothing other than 100% or 0. So again, just make sure you're aware of that. The other thing here is that they do support stick clicking. So if I push down on the D-pad, you'll see that the button L3 is lighting up when I push all the way down. The problem though is I can't move the controller and have that stick click actuate at the same time. So I can get it here, but if I move to the right, it turns off the L3. So it's very limited in what it can do with a click, but you can get it if you have a game that just supports a single push for some kind of function. Likewise, the right thumbstick behaves exactly in the same way, again, on or off, nothing in between. And you can also do those stick clicks there by pushing down on the D-pad. The other D-pad here will map to the D-pad on the controller, as you can see, so that seems to work as advertised. You also have your start button and minus button there, and your other buttons here are in the same position. The left and right shoulder buttons do not have two layers to them, so they're right next to each other. So you've got your two L and R's here that will actuate. And then if you keep an eye on the trigger here, I'm going to push down R2, and you can see that goes from 0 to 100% as well. There's no analog variation here. This is either on or off again. But overall, this is how it works. And in case you're wondering, there are no rumble controls on this, nor are there any motion controls. So it is, in many ways, a basic controller. So you can probably get a sense already as to which games will work best with this kind of controller. And now we're going to take a look at some games that do work pretty well with it and a few that don't. So let's get my Nintendo Switch booted up so you can see how that works. So here's one game that a lot of people said this controller was kind of made for, which is Link's Awakening. If you've played this game at all, you know it's a remake of the classic Game Boy game, and it does not allow you to move Link around with the D-pad. You have to use the analog stick, but of course with this controller, the D-pads are the analog stick, and it works just fine. As I'm moving Link around here, it feels very crisp and accurate. As you can see here, we're not getting any real errant diagonals either, so it's been a good experience here overall. And if you've been wanting to play this game with a D-pad, this is the way you can do it, and it seems to be a good match for this controller. Now, of course, the right stick here, or the right pad, is not used at all in this game. So let's take a look at a twin stick shooter and see how that works. So let's check out this game called Xeno Crisis. This is one of the 16-bit inspired games. It's a twin stick shooter. And what I'm going to do here is use the right stick, or the right pad, to do my shooting. And as you can see, we're able to get all of the movements that this game calls for. They're a little bit more mechanical perhaps than it would be with a thumbstick, which will be rotated, but it seems to be working pretty nicely here. I've been playing this game a little bit that I picked up the other day. I've been having a blast with it, and it really does actually work with the twin D-pads here. I did not expect it to actually play this well, but it does. So I think for some of the twin stick shooters out there, this should work fine. It's very easy to execute a diagonal, as you can see here, and it's been a pretty good experience. It doesn't feel, again, as natural perhaps as having a stick, but I think you can get used to it, and to some degree it might allow you to be a little bit more precise with your diagonals, because you really have to be deliberately pointing down in the diagonal direction to make it work. And as you can see here, it seems to be running pretty nicely. So these are some games that work really well. So let's take a look now at some games that might be iffy with this control arrangement. So this is Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I was surprised that it plays as good as it does. So again, he's always going to be running here. You don't have the precision. So if you're trying to nudge him to the edge of a cliff or something, you'll have to like tap on the D-pad to move him over slowly there, but it's not all that precise. So if I switch back over to my thumbstick here with the analog control, you'll see that we can make him walk more slowly if I just gently move the stick. So you lose that precision, but it is overall a pretty fun and playable experience nonetheless, even with these digital controls. Although I can see games that require precision here that would be very challenging or unplayable. But you got all your camera movement, that works the same way. In fact, I was surprised it didn't take that much getting used to get the camera to move the way I want. I can do diagonal movements here without too many issues. This game requires you to click your stick on the left to make him crouch, which I can do here just by pushing down on the center of the D-pad, so that works. But of course, there will be games where you need to hold down that click and move at the same time that this controller won't let you do. So I think it's going to vary based on the game that you're playing. but I was surprised that this was more fun than I expected it to be. It wasn't a cumbersome challenge. It was something familiar, although a little bit different. And I think it might be fun to see if some games work better with this than perhaps a stick. But again, you're going to run into stuff that won't be so fun. So it'll vary based on what you play with. But overall, it's been a pretty fun time here just experimenting with this controller versus the traditional analog controls you typically would have with a 3D game like this. I tried out Mario Odyssey, I did Dragon Quest Builders and a few others. Most of them played pretty nicely, and again, it's going to be up to you to decide which control scheme is better. I was surprised it was better than I thought, but again, it's not going to be as precise as analog controls will be. Now, we also tested input latency. In other words, how long does it take for a button push to register on screen? When we tested the controller wirelessly connected to the Switch, we were seeing about 72 milliseconds, which is just a little slower than the Pro controller. Now, the screen we used for the Switch was the internal display, and we shoot the screen at 240 frames per second with my iPhone along with the controller in view to get that measurement. So we're not going to be giving you a scientifically accurate and precise measurement, but it's pretty close to what you can expect. And we're trying to get a real-world number here. What's it going to be like when you account for the display and the Bluetooth communication and all of that? So again, about 72 milliseconds on this one. The Pro controller, we've tested around 66 or so typically. On the PC, wired in, we were getting about 36 milliseconds, which is very good. That is actually a little faster than our Xbox One controller usually gets connected up via USB. We have a 144 hertz gaming display that we do that test on. I suspect that because this controller has such a short actuation versus the Xbox controller, it's probably about the same and within the margin of error. So really no issues with this controller compared to a Microsoft controller that we know is the fastest one we've got in the repertoire here. So that was good. We also tested this with Bluetooth, and that one was about 10 milliseconds slower with the Bluetooth communication going on. And your mileage will vary there based on what kind of Bluetooth receiver you're using in your computer. There's always going to be some variation there, but in our testing, it was about 10 milliseconds, and that was relatively similar to what we saw with the Switch when we were wired in versus just going over the wireless connection. So my overall impression of these controllers is that it was better than I expected, but it's really going to vary based on the game. Some controllers that you might get from 8BitDo will work just as well as the first-party Nintendo products will. These are going to be very different because some games might require precise analog controls that these lack. Other games might require the D-pad versus the thumbsticks, and unfortunately, these controllers cannot swap the controls around. It would have been great to have a switch on here to have the D-pad work through the D-pad here versus this Joy-Con inspired thing. So that's not working for me. But for games that work with this, it's actually much better than you would think. The twin stick shooters were working great with it. So there's a lot of good things about this. But again, it's going to vary widely based on the individual game that you're playing. So they could have been made better with a proper D-pad down here, or at least the ability to swap it around. But you will be surprised by just how well sometimes things work with two D-pads versus two thumbsticks. But again, it's going to vary based on your personal preferences and the games that you're playing. So worth a shot, I think, if you're curious. It'll be better than you expect, but again, not for everybody. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters, the Four Guys with Quarters podcast, Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Brian Parker, and Kalyan Kumar. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.